When I ran a full service marketing agency, I made the decision back in 2018 to move off of WordPress to Hubspot. Now, in my role as a fractional CMO, I'm no longer constrained to a specific technology. But I find myself reluctant to recommend WordPress as a website to my clients. I'm biased. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I don't like WordPress. So I thought it'd be a good idea to bring in a web developer who not only uses WordPress and HubSpot, but several other development platforms and really get her point of view. So I'd like to introduce you, Lydia. Hey, Lydia.
Hi, Dave.
Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right. Well, my name is Lydia Chiu. I'm a partner at JubJub Interactive. I have been developing websites since websites started to exist, and glad to be talking to you today.
Very cool. So there's other platforms that you have that you develop on besides WordPress and HubSpot. Can you just name a couple?
Sure. So yeah, we like WordPress. We like HubSpot. We also develop a lot. We're a partner with Webflow and Expression Engine. Craft CMS is another one we love. So there are a lot of alternatives out there that people don't necessarily know exist.
Very cool. So let me set the table here, because if we try answering the question, is WordPress a good platform for websites? It's going to kind of be difficult to answer that without some context. So let's start out by first talking about companies who have at least $2 million or more in revenue. Let's also limit ourselves to the B2B world. And let's also include e-commerce into the discussion, because selfishly, a lot of my clients are in the manufacturing and distribution area who use e-commerce to sell their products online. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
So there are three questions I'd like to frame up in this discussion. The first is, what are the benefits for choosing WordPress? The second is, what are the risks and challenges of using WordPress? And then, so what are those alternatives that you talked about to WordPress, and why would you recommend them over WordPress?
Sure.
So let's first start out with, what are the benefits for choosing WordPress?
Sure. So WordPress is the most popular website platform. There are more websites on WordPress than any other single platform. And so I think in terms of, the old adage, like no one ever got fired for choosing Microsoft, no one, it is potentially, people might get fired for choosing WordPress, but it's a pretty safe platform just because of the numbers. Because of the numbers, there are all sorts of add-ons. If there's something that you need to be built, somebody else probably encountered that same thing. It probably exists somewhere in the ecosystem. And so it's also pretty flexible. So it has grown a lot in the past few years, and it's matured a lot. And there are some pretty good frameworks that have sort of become best practice standards. And, the other thing about it being so popular is that you can find a developer. It's really easy to find a developer.
Yeah, because there's such a large ecosystem, there's a lot of developers out there that can support this, as well as many choices of frameworks and different themes and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So then, what are some of the challenges and risks of using WordPress?
So I'm going to repeat the same list. I think because there are so many installations of WordPress, there's so many websites, it's an easy target for hackers, not only just because of the numbers, but also, given the fact that it's open source and all of that kind of stuff, there are a lot of exploits. The other thing is there's no one right way to build a WordPress site. And so because there are so many different implementations, you're not getting necessarily, if one company has a WordPress site built from one agency and another company has another site built from a different agency, those two sites might not actually look anything like each other on the back end. You can say it's WordPress, but with all of the add-ons and frameworks and themes and everything that you have to implement in order to get the site up and running, it could look totally different. And so, for example, one of our clients had a WordPress site developed before they were our client, and they were given a 190-page user guide for how to use the WordPress CMS. And one of the selling points for WordPress is supposed to be that it's easy to use. but it is possible to make it completely difficult to use. So difficult that you need a 190-page user guide to try to figure out how to use it. So yeah, that's one of the challenges, is you don't quite know what you're going to get. The best practices are a little bit more, instead of industry wide, it's more sort of like sliver of industry, or for a particular development shop. They probably have, everyone should have their own best practices, but they are typically their own best practices. So the other challenge is that because there are so many add-ons and the ecosystem is so big, and because people can do whatever they want to, there are so many security exploits. Daily, we get emailed security exploits, and if you don't keep up to date with all of those security exploits and patches, then your site, it runs the risk of being hacked. And the risk of that is that they can reach data that's in your site. If you're collecting any kind of data, if there's data on users that are in your site, there's been form submissions on your site, they can get access to that kind of data. They can also start serving malware from your site, which then you become liable from a risk standpoint if people are downloading malware that infects their site from your website. I mean, that affects their network from your website. That becomes an issue. So there's a lot of risk, and not to mention the damage it can do to your brand if somebody goes to your brand and your website and it's been defaced. And in particular with e-commerce, if you have a lot of transactions and customer data in your database, then all of that could be at risk if there's a hack. So that was kind of long. I don't know. Did I answer all of the questions, or?
Yeah, let's dive into a little bit deeper on a couple of those. So,
okay.
Yeah, I remember when I talk with developers, the thing they hate is reading their own code from like 6 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
or reading someone else's code. Because like you said, everyone has their own best practices and different ways of doing it. So are you saying that even though the front end can look the same, it's the back end coding that can be different? So because as a development agency, you've taken over WordPress sites from either the clients, from an internal dev team, or from other agencies. Have you found that there's a standard model, or does it really vary from every agency to agency or developer?
It varies a lot. And even agencies, I mean, because WordPress is so popular and there's so many people, they may have a single developer, it may be a big agency. The way that the sites have put together, even within the same agency, sometimes is not consistent. And oftentimes, actually, when we inherit a new WordPress site, we will require that it is at least partially rebuilt, so that we don't have we're not spending all of our time and our clients' money trying to figure out what somebody else did if it didn't make sense. And part of the challenge with the, inheriting sites is there can be add-ons that are no longer supported as well, or custom add-ons. And so there's no guarantee that those are going to be updatable when WordPress releases new versions. And so that's, so you have to be very, very ultra diligent about all of that kind of stuff. So yes, oftentimes it's at least a behind the scenes rebuild prior to moving forward with new clients.
So even though that you can say, oh, it's a WordPress site, what you're saying though is, yes, it's a WordPress site and it looks and acts like WordPress on the front when you look at it. Mm-hmm. But really, almost every WordPress site is a custom website, because every developer has their own way of coding things up.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And why don't we talk a little bit about some of the risks of the plugins being out of date or incompatible, and that's why maybe the WordPress engine hasn't been updated, which probably leads us into like a discussion around security risk. But can you talk a little bit about the compatibility and the upgrading the WordPress engine?
Sure. So the WordPress core platform that comes out from WordPress itself, there are going to be, you can just plan that there's going to be it's a rapid update cycle. It's not like some software that will do a quarterly update or something like that. Because there are so many security exploits, we get notifications daily, pretty much, that something has to be updated. And so because of that, not every add-on is going to be future-proof. And in fact, it's very difficult to be, not to give those developers a hard time. It's very difficult to be absolutely future-proof. You have to be in it all the time and just be ready. Like if you have a WordPress add-on, you have to be prepared to support it on a code level basis if you're the add-on provider. And so it's very tricky to, when there's an update that comes out, if you try to just update everything, what happens to some people is they click the update buttons and then all of a sudden the site's broken. And it's because the add-ons or the theme are not compatible with whatever updates WordPress just did. And I think the key thing to realize, which I think that this is generally not something that's super important to business, the business side of things, but it's important to developers, and it has business implications, is that WordPress is more kind of a page level paradigm in terms of the design. And when you store how something looks in WordPress, the content and the design all get stored together. And so you can't separate out the design from the coding and the content. It's all together, stored as one thing. In other content management systems that are more kind of like true content management systems, the data is separate from the design. And so if something changes on the back end, you've always got the data and you don't have to worry about that. And the design in the front end is separate. And so updates on those types of systems don't tend to have this like massive ripple effect where they do in WordPress, where you might update this one little thing and then all of a sudden everything's broken. And it's because it's all stored in the same place.
Yeah. I remember when we were on WordPress and deving WordPress, there was also like for the plugins, there's a timing issue, just kind of like what you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You had to make sure that all the plugins had updated themselves to the current engine rev before you update it. So there's coordination that happens, and the entire upgrade could be held up from one or two plugins that just haven't gotten around to certifying on that version.
Yes, exactly. And something that we just encountered is there was a very popular plugin that did a very small thing. And it was pretty much like the industry standard plugin for this particular little piece of functionality. All of a sudden, they stopped supporting it. And it's a free plugin, which everybody loves. Everybody loves that there's plugins that are free. But guess what? They have no obligation to support that plugin. And so and there was a security exploit in the plugin. And so all of a sudden, I think there were over 1 million installs of this plugin. All of a sudden, all of those sites had to swap out functionality. They had to remove that plugin and put in a different plugin just so that a certain type of image file could be shown on the website. And so that type of thing will happen. And so it requires constant vigilance.
Yeah, everyone likes the free plugins, but it becomes a question of support. So often people you should be paying for the plugins.
Yeah.
Because then there's a dedicated team behind the scenes supporting that.
Yes. And there's some kind of an obligation that they have to the people that are using it as well.
Yeah. So another one of the more popular plugins that I remember when we talk about security exploits is there's a lot of different like security plugins that can be used to help prevent hacking. Have you found those to be, without naming names, but have you found those to be useful, or have people still been able to get around those, well-known plugins for security?
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of best of breed security plugins. There's also, firewalls and stuff that you can that you can use on web hosting. There's always a way around it. It almost always comes down to exploits in the WordPress code. And so even the best security plugins, if the WordPress code line is, if there's an exploit, then there's an exploit. And it's about most of the way most of the plugins work is they notify you that there's a problem. They don't necessarily prevent the problem.
Yeah.
Or all of the problems. But yes, I mean, we have found that if you use the best practices plugins with best practices configuration and best of breed hosting and like the full stack sort of as recommended, and you're extremely diligent about updating, and you only use sort of a list of best of breed plugins and themes, then yes, you can have a successful, secure WordPress site.
And there's one final question I want to touch upon before we move on to some alternatives. And that's, Lydia, your company does WordPress hosting, right? You have a team of engineers, you have hosting servers. And so can you talk a little bit about what's involved in choosing the right hosting company? Because it's not just selecting the right, WordPress, the theme, and the plugins. It's also what hosting company you use.
Yes. And some of this is going to be, preference for the clients, but most of our clients, they don't want to be dealing with, if there is some sort of an issue, they don't want to be dealing with some sort of, ticketing system where they put something into the void and then they don't know whether or not things are going to, when they're going to be resolved and any of that type of thing. But I think the main thing, so you want to be sure that you're using business level hosting. That's like the first thing. If we're talking about companies that are B2B companies that have $2 million in revenue and up, you want to have business level hosting, because if you are on bargain hosting, WordPress, if you're running all of the stuff you should be running, it will take up resources and your site will be slow if you're on servers that are oversold. So that's the first thing, is you want to have true business level hosting. You want to have hosting from people that are providing WordPress hosting in particular. So you can host WordPress on anything that has PHP and MySQL, but you want to be sure that it's not just sort of plain Jane hosting, because there's special security setup that we would recommend for the servers. And it's like at every level of your stack. So you have the databases set up a certain way, you have the servers set up a certain way, you have backups set up a certain way, because oftentimes, as we mentioned, when you upgrade something, sometimes things break. So you want to have it as easy as possible for users to, or your developers to, take a quick backup before running updates. Yeah. It's also good to have a hosting provider, depending on how actively you're developing. It's good to have a hosting provider that has multiple environments available. So you might have a development environment as well as your live environment, and that makes it easy to publish from one to another, so that you can have kind of code level, development level changes going on while the main site is live, and then you can test those changes safely. That's another thing that you'd want to look at for your host. You'd want them to have, access to a content delivery network layer, both for speed for WordPress and security. And I think those would probably be the main things. But like I started off mentioning support. Support's a big thing. You've got to figure out, do you want to be able to talk to a human who's going to be able to solve your problem? Or do you do you want to have chat support? Those types of things. I mean, all of those things kind of go into different hosting companies are going to have different levels of service available for those types of, preferences.
And one of the things I also remember when we were developing WordPress, and if something breaks, there's always a conversation of is it the actual WordPress? Is it the actual website? Or is it the host? And, when you get two different divisions or two different companies, everyone's like, oh, no, it's their fault. Oh, it's their fault. And so one of the advantages is that I think your company has is that you have a development team and you host. So there's really no pointing fingers. Maybe maybe internally there is, but for a customer facing or but from a customer facing standpoint, there's one single point of contact. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I remember when things went sideways on our WordPress sites, we had to liaison with our hosting company. It wasn't you. I didn't know you back then. And it was always a push and pull between, is it the hosting problem,
Mm-hmm.
or is it actually the code that we developed on the back end? So yeah, there's a lot of complexities, it seems, that with WordPress comes. There's a lot of choices, but there
Yes.
also becomes a lot of complexities. Everything from almost every WordPress install is, air quotes here, custom, because every developer does it slightly different. And
Mm-hmm.
there's all these plugins, and there's hosting considerations, the interaction between the hosting and the developer.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of balls in the air that you have to juggle when using WordPress.
Yeah, for sure.
So then let's move on to the third topic then, is really, so what are alternatives to WordPress, and when would you recommend using, maybe HubSpot or a different CMS, or even when it comes to e-commerce, that sort of stuff, because a lot of people do run WooCommerce
Mm-hmm.
on as their e-commerce platform. So what are some of maybe the use cases where you recommend a different platform as opposed to WordPress, depending on the use case?
Sure. I'm gonna actually start with the last thing, and that's for e-commerce. So WooCommerce is powerful, but it is also updated constantly. And not only just, little updates for security, they redo their database. There's a lot of change, which means there's a lot of ongoing cost and babysitting with WooCommerce, if there's any kind of complexity with what you're selling.
Hmm.
And so for e-commerce, I think that's the easiest recommendation. For almost all e-commerce projects these days, we're recommending Shopify. And we love Shopify. It is, for a while there, in the early days, it didn't have the rich feature set that it does now, and all of the APIs and the developer-friendly tools and all of that kind of stuff. But it has come so far, and it is so easy to use. And not only that, it's for the end user, for the clients. For the clients, whenever you're using WooCommerce, it's like you've got this little e-commerce module within WordPress. And so you kind of have to find your way into the e-commerce thing when you log in from the end user. And then you click around a whole bunch more to find the orders and all of that kind of stuff. But with Shopify, if it is primarily e-commerce, then it's so easy. Everything's geared exactly towards that. They have millions of customers. I feel like they really focused on usability for the people managing the website as well as the people using the website. So they've got a ton of data. They are constantly making improvements. They just released, like one of the big things they did in the last couple of years is they released this whole simplified checkout process. And, that was based on users. They're doing the monitoring. They make it actually easier for you to use best practices because they're doing the data analysis to see how all of their millions of users are checking out and seeing how they can make that simpler and stickier. Mm-hmm. And also, there's a great kind of upgrade and scale path with Shopify Plus. And so if we're not looking so much at the $2 million revenue, or maybe you're doing $2 million of revenue just from your store, that kind of thing, you can upgrade to Shopify Plus for more distributor type or wholesale type functionality, a lot of types of sophisticated functionality. And so it's really, it's got the security. They have a great security record. You just don't have to worry about anywhere near as much. And really from a platform standpoint, the pricing is very comparable to WooCommerce, because with the WooCommerce and the WordPress, you're still going to be paying for the WordPress hosting. You're going to be paying for all of the add-ons. It's really, from that perspective, the cost, I think it's very comparable. And ongoing development, for WordPress, you may be able to, WordPress development, I think, can sometimes look a little lower than other type of development right at the beginning. But if you start looking at year 2, year 3, you're going to see other platforms give you more for your initial investment and not have to, not require as much upkeep or not cost as much to do additional things. At least that's been our experience. So that's the first thing. For e-commerce, Shopify is a fantastic alternative. It also has a great add-on environment, but it is much more consolidated and vetted than a WordPress add-on situation. So for other types of sites, I think HubSpot is fantastic, especially if you're using any of their other types of functionality. So if you have a CRM that you're trying to hook into, we've had more and more of our clients recently switch from Salesforce into HubSpot for that type of functionality. And so the more that you can have just on the same platform, the better. Obviously, their marketing automation tools are the industry leaders in that. And their CRM is super easy to use compared to other CRMs. So recently, it used to be 5-10 years ago, the HubSpot CMS was kind of like, I don't know, it's like an afterthought compared to their other stuff. But recently, the last few years, they have devoted a lot of resources to it, and they've built it into a true CMS where you've got developer tools, you have much more sophisticated theming, you have better themes available out of the box also, but also true content management capabilities where you can define your own types of content, your own content model. There's database functionality with HubDB that you can connect into. And there's all sorts of third-party APIs if you want to get data into or out of HubSpot. And so much like Shopify, it is a fantastic hosted platform that has a great security record. It typically performs really well on performance tests for site speed. And, they're just a best-of-breed software platform. So we love developing in HubSpot, especially now that the tools have caught up.
Obviously, we used to use Dev on HubSpot, my team, when I had a team. So I love HubSpot for everything you just said. And I remember when HubSpot first launched, it was kind of janky.
Yeah.
But definitely over the last couple of years, they've really dialed in their tools and functionality. So very cool. Yeah. But there are other platforms besides HubSpot.
Yes, there are, definitely. We also really love Webflow. Webflow has kind of become the darling of designers. And Webflow has really great integrations with all of the stack that designers love. So Figma, there's a Figma to Webflow workflow now. And what is really nice about Webflow is that it's a visual designer, kind of like what you get in WordPress. So like maybe sort of like an Elementor or a Divi in the WordPress world. But on the back end, you are actually defining styles and universal styles. And so where design is really important and brand is really important and the consistency. Also for people who need to build landing pages that look really great but are complex and maybe have complex content, Webflow is a fantastic system. It is also hosted. And so you don't have any of the issues with the add-ons and upgrades and all of that kind of that go along with the WordPress security issues. But you have a lot of flexibility with the design, and there's a really rich template ecosystem as well. The themes aren't as expensive as the HubSpot themes, and but it's great. It's great for sites where you want rich design, where the design is really valued. Another platform that we love, and we're partners for this as well, is Expression Engine. Expression Engine is a true CMS. It's commercially supported. It's commercial software. And licensing is around the $300 mark. So really, when you look at the core plus add-ons, it's the pricing for the software is very similar to a WordPress, but Expression Engine has an excellent security record and a really good extensibility framework. And so for data-driven sites where maybe you have thousands of products that have lots of information. So we were talking about e-commerce type sites. If there's a site that has, a lot of times you'll have product data, maybe you need an MSDS sheet, maybe you have a product spec sheet, maybe you have other supporting data, you have maybe related videos, related resources, any type of related content, lots of content, multilingual content. Expression Engine excels at that. And it is a true content management system where the design is totally separate from the data. And so once you have your 10,000 items in the system, if you want to make it look entirely different, we can do that. And you don't have to go and recreate all the pages and re-enter all of the PDFs and all of that kind of stuff. It's all actually in the system. And so it's always been a favorite of ours as well. And like I said, the security record is it's fantastic.
So, I mean, it seems like, there's a lot of choices besides WordPress.
Yeah.
Maybe to kind of wrap up this conversation, what is the best way for companies to determine, well, which platform should I be using?
Well, I would recommend seeking the advice of an expert, actually, because it's not necessarily an easy answer. There's I think it's important to understand the goals and risk tolerance of the company. Yeah. So for example, and the type of company, whether they do business in multiple locations around the world, whether they're in cybersecurity, if they're a government contractor, there might be certain requirements, and there's a whole breadth of things to take into consideration before making a recommendation. What I would say is, there's a lot of great choices out there. I think it's important to understand what the different factors are that you should be weighing in order to decide which direction to go.
Yeah, I mean, that you speak my language in terms of just gathering requirements. Mm-hmm. It's the requirements that's going to drive the system selection process.
Yes, for sure.
Very cool. Well, I want to say thank you for spending the time with me, educating myself and other folks here on the different platforms and kind of really answering the question of, is WordPress a good option? And really, it depends upon the requirements.
Definitely.
So thank you for being here with me. For those who want to get in touch with Lydia, I'm going to be leaving her contact information at the bottom of this transcript. And thank you so much, Lydia.
Thanks for having me, Dave. This was a lot of fun.
This is great. Thanks for spending time with us. There's more great educational content and interviews for you at dowhat.works/podcasts.